So just discipline in general is a good thing. Being consistent and doing the same thing when nobody else does is an amazingly rare trait. And when you can build a team of people that love to be good at systems and good at doing the same thing and doing it really well, it's amazing what you can build, from properties to restaurants to any business, just by doing the same things great every day.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Our guest today has a very impressive background. He started in high school, a business, or actually he started working in high school, then quickly opened his own business and at 20 years old. And then by 32, he's contemplating retiring. And man, he didn't want to stay retired, but then he did bigger and better things. And you're going to hear from that today. You're going to hear Justin Sloan. He's the CEO of Sloan Capital. Wow, what an impressive background. But he became passionate about cell phones, which you're going to hear him talk about in high school. And then he started selling them and got good at selling, good at, obviously the commission-based type pay. And man, he tried college twice and it didn't work out for him. But you're going to hear his business, how now moving into real estate and how he has grown a real estate business, what he's doing, what he thinks about the economy, and how that's affecting everything he is doing in his business. Even the data that, man, he said he's a data guy, and data tells a story, and he elaborates on what that means and how most of us aren't paying attention. Not everyone has the opportunity to retire at 32 and then decide to do some other amazing things after that. Our guest today has done just that. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Whitney. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, honored to have you on. Looking forward to diving into your story and some of your just expertise that I know are going to help the listeners today. I want to hear some of that story, though. I know you started at 20 and just did some amazing stuff. And let's dive into that and how that's helped you to do so many other things as well.
Yeah, so I kind of right in high school became passionate about cell phones. And, I was a senior in high school, and every day when I was done with school at, somewhere between 1 and 3 p.m., I'd run to the local mall and sell phones until 9 o'clock at night, and kind of became good at it and realized that the more that I worked and the more that I sold, the more that I could make. So I kind of became hooked to this idea of commission and sales and, making what eating what you kill. And so long story short, a couple years later, I tried the college route, and that wasn't for me. And so I decided to go all in and open my own cell phone store. And I was the only employee, and I worked open to close for 4 months until we had enough money that we could hire another employee, and then ended up scaling that and opening another store and another store and another store, and ran that business for a very long period. Had some challenges later on, as many things in the tech business change and all of that. And that's when I began to invest into real estate and started buying houses and strip malls that my cell phone stores were located in. And like you said, at 32, the time was there where I had enough properties that would pay all my bills and then some. And I put the final key in the final store, and that was a wrap until now. Until now. That's right. No, that's so exciting. I was just thinking about, you becoming passionate about that in high school and then go taking some action, right? I mean, you seem like you must have been driven to go do that, right? Spend that much time in that industry early on and then start selling them that young. And really, it sounds like maybe getting that drive from living off commissions, right? Selling and commissions and not pushing you. It's interesting that you tried college and said, you know what, that's not for me. Why is that? Yeah, so I actually thought I wanted to go to college to fix computers. I liked technology. I liked the idea of improving things and building things. And for a short period, I worked in a computer repair store when I was like 15, 16 years old. I could barely even drive, but I knew what I was doing. And so they gave me little tasks and all that. And then that moved on to fixing cell phones. And I really thought that, helping people fix things and set up cool networks, like that was my future until I went to school. And for 6 months sat there and had to be told what Excel was and to click on cell B13. And I just went nuts, because at this point I was already, making good money and I had a good business and, I had a good job. And so I all of a sudden I was going to sit in class for the next 4 years to basically learn how to do the same thing that I was. I mean, my teacher was so old, she had actually written the book that we were reading, and it was like 7 years outdated already at that point. So there was just not a lot of learning that could be done. And it was better for me to get in the field and just continue to grow that way. And then I ended up, like I said, starting my own, growing it from there. And I actually went back to college a second time and dropped out. So not drop out once, drop out twice. But yeah, I mean, hey, we can't say we haven't tried at least, you know?
No, it sounds like me actually. So, but no, you started your own store. How'd you get the funds and really the confidence to go do that?
Yeah. So at that point, when I was 17, I was working in a store part-time. Well, it was basically full-time because I would work as many hours as they would give me, knowing that I could sell more phones. And then when I went to college, I just lived under my means and saved every penny that I could. I knew at this point, then I was running one of their stores and then another one. And so I knew the business model. I knew their commission structure. I knew what we did. So I did the math. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm making this much for them. Why don't I go make this much? So I knew if I took X amount of dollars, and they gave me the inventory on consignment, which was really nice. And so basically, if I could build out a store and get some cabinets and paint, signage and all that kind of stuff, that I thought myself sitting in there would be enough to generate the revenue with my relationships. And fortunately, I was right.
Love that. I love the drive, though, that you had and the willingness to step out there and take some risk to go make it. I really believed in you could go do it, right? And did it. Did that come from like parents that were entrepreneurs as well, or like other friends, or like how were you thinking that way? Because often I just don't see 17-year-olds that think like that, right?
Yeah. So I've thought about this a lot. I wish that there was some reason. The only thing that I can think of is my brothers and I were raised by a single mom. She always had 6 or 7 different jobs at all times. So there was always, it was a hustle. It was a grind. It was, go and deliver Avon and go deliver papers and waitress for a little bit and do whatever she could to make sure that us boys were fed. And so it was really the mentality of you go do it and then you think about it later, right? When you're a single mom with 3 boys, you don't have an option to think about how to strategize for dinner. You got to go get dinner. And so I think when I get business ideas, a lot of time I say yes way faster than most people and are able to figure out some of the small details. Because if you understand it at a macro level, then dialing in the real specifics of it isn't that crazy. When I was getting into cell phones, it was simply dollars in and here's your fixed cost and dollars out. And then real estate's the same kind of way. And as we're doing a lot of restaurants right now, it's simply just a repeatable process that if X, Y, and Z makes sense, then the other things make sense too. And as many of them as we can do, as many as we could properties as we could buy, as many stores as we could open, is the same system just over and over with very little chance of failure inside of that system.
Did you start bringing in investors to start opening more stores? Was that all, funded by your own business?
Yeah, literally funded by working in the stores 80 hours a week and living under my means. And, after X amount of months of owning one, I hired someone and then went to a local bank and took out a loan for a kiosk in a mall and, paid that off over the next 2 years while we expanded and then, bought another store and opened another one, just, brick by brick. Right now, we're going a lot faster in the restaurants I'm doing. I'm opening almost one a month right now. And so we're using investor-backed dollars and syndications for that. But back in the day of cell phones, no, it was make sure that, I understood the business. And then from there, man, I wish I knew what I knew now because I would have scaled it a lot bigger, but that's okay. Still young.
Yeah, oh yeah, and you learned a lot very fast, and you did scale very fast, right? Just considering, then you sold it, right? You sold that business chain, right? And then it's like, okay, well, it sounds like he didn't want to stay retired, so young. What was your plan then moving forward? I want to get to where you're at today, and so the listeners can hear some of the business model that you have today, and then I want to dive into some of your expertise as well.
Yeah, I like that you act like I had a huge choice with exiting the cell phone business. I did sell some of the stores and, we did close some of them. The business changed and the company that I was selling, unfortunately, wasn't one of the winners. They ended up getting bought up a couple years after I exited the business, but the writing was on the wall. Honestly, about 5 years prior to that, the writing was on the wall. They stopped upgrading their towers. Apple wouldn't let them have the iPhone. They then sold off all their towers and leased them back for revenue. And you start doing the math, you're like, wait a second, I don't think I want to keep investing into this company. But it was still making money and all that kind of stuff. So that's when I started doing everything that I could to learn about other ways to make money, while my number one business, and had been my number one business forever, was, I knew that water was getting in the ship. And so I had to look for other opportunities. So I asked everybody and ended up talking with someone that says, every wealthy person I know owns real estate. And I said, well, that's great, but I don't have time to go manage leaky toilets and all this kind of stuff. He said, well, why don't you hire a property manager? And I was so naive at this point, I didn't even know what a property manager was. But this idea that I could put my money places, and, if I bought a house for X and I rented it for Y, even with property management and everything, there should be profit left over. And at that moment, the bug bit me. And it was on. I mean, I flew back to Cedar Rapids. I interviewed every single property manager in the town. They were all annoyed as heck because I'm just a kid that wants to buy properties. But I found the right person, and I started to build that system that allowed me to own my retail stores and then put the money to work into building this other thing. And that scaled really fast over the next 4, 5, 6 years. And then, like I said, walked out of the final store at 32.
Wow. Well, I'm reminded of a very well-known book that you've probably heard of, and I love mentioning it. But Who Moved My Cheese? I'm sure you're familiar, but I love that story. I read it. There's a kid's version, just in case the listeners don't know, and it's I read it to my kids often, even from like 3 years old, and up, and they love the story as well. But you reminded me of that, because two of the characters, Sniff and Scurry, I mean, they're ready to move on to the next thing, right? They see what's happening, and they know, hey, we've got to get to looking for the next pile of cheese, right? I mean, the writing was on the wall, literally, in the book, and it sounds like that's what happened to you. Right, you saw the writing on the wall, and what I love there is that you were ready to take action. Right, you didn't say, "Oh no, we're gonna hunker down here, and this is still gonna work." And like you took action, and man, I think it paid off in a big way that you were willing to keep doing that. And so I wanted to move on a little bit, though. So you got out of that, but now describe your business now and your focus now, and how it functions a little bit, because I want to get your take on some things that are there. It's going to be relevant to everybody listening. I don't care if they're a passive investor or an active investor syndicator. I want to get to that, but man, describe your business model now.
Yeah, thank you. So I've taken a different approach over the last couple of years as I watched everybody pile into real estate. Everybody was a genius when rates were 2.5% and buying buildings at 3.5 cap rates. But I kind of sat back and saw the world's largest game of hot potato being played. And essentially people trading properties and just telling the bank that they were going to raise rents by 10% and flip the units. And, then they were going to exit at a 4 cap. But the reality was, that just wasn't going to happen. And interest rates weren't going to stay down there forever. And so I actually made a decision over the last couple of years to sell a lot of my real estate and now position myself to go beat up the landlords that were greedy over the last couple of years. So I'm actually building another chain of businesses right now. It's called Everbowl. It's an acai bowl chain. So not only am I a tenant where I still, I own the restaurants and I'm there as a tenant, but I'm also a landlord where I own a lot of these buildings. So I get to see it from both points of view. And over the last year, retail traffic and retail leasing has started to really plummet. A lot of new inventory was added on. And it was very expensive with high interest rates, and makes it so that small business owners have a less chance for success, right? It's harder now to start a business than it was, which is why I've been positioned and using private dollars to go beat up these landlords when nobody else can expand. And so, again, I took the approach of taking some off the table. If I could sell stuff at 5 or 6 caps, I would never pay 5 or 6 caps. So if somebody else wanted to, good for them. And now we're kind of sitting and waiting for this next cycle of interest rates and refis and people realizing that their properties aren't worth anything near what they paid. And I'm going to take advantage of a lot of things in the next few years. But a lot like what you said with moving the cheese, I don't feel like I have to buy real estate every year forever. And I didn't feel like I had to open cell phone stores forever. There's times when it makes more sense to buy more or to buy less or to maintain. And over the last few years, I've had a lot of thoughts and feelings that it's time to take some off the table. And so far, I've been right. And I think that as these rents continue to trend down nationwide, they are, with multifamily, with retail, with everything, that I'm going to be able to build a great cash flowing business while others are struggling. And we'll do the same thing I did 10 years ago, use that profit to go in and buy strip malls, buy more real estate, buy things when nobody else can.
Yeah. Well, let's get to it a little bit. I want us to have enough time to talk about, because I would love to hear your expectations on the economy and how that, I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, but how that's affecting what you're deciding to do, right? And already has, right? You sold real estate, and everybody says, well, I don't have a crystal ball. But what I come back and say is, well, what you think is going to happen affects what you're doing today, right? In a big way. And so none of us know exactly 100% for sure. However, you got to put pieces together and make your best guesstimate, right? I mean, ultimately, your best educated guess of what you believe is going to happen based on previous experience or history or whatever, and say, okay, because of these things, this is what I'm doing, right? And so what is that for you? What are your beliefs about what's going to happen? Your expectations on the economy 12, 18 months out, whatever, and how that's affecting the decisions you're making in your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a data guy, and I believe that data tells a story. It's up to us to interpret that story and make the actions accordingly. But there's also people that are telling you the story, right? The Fed is telling you we are going to raise rates higher and longer than anyone wants. Okay, they've said that for the last year. Now we're sitting here with prime at 7.75 or 8% or whatever. And people are like, wait a minute, we never thought rates would go up this high. Like, the government was literally screaming at you that they're going to raise them higher than you imagined and keep them longer than they ever imagined. And then, so for me, that tells a lot of a story, right? Because a lot of people in real estate think real estate just goes up. But in investment real estate, the return that you get on the real estate is also going to be based upon the return that you can get in other places in the markets. And right now, going and buying a 4 cap when you can get treasury bills at 5% makes no sense. And so people don't have the same risk reward to go buy a piece of land and sign a lease and take out a 70% loan and all this kind of stuff when you can just give money to the government and they'll give you 5.5% back tax free. So I think the next couple of years are going to be less properties trading. Naturally, a lot of people are locked into low loan amounts and low interest rates. So they're going to try and hold those as long as they can. But the blood in the water is going to happen when refis happen. And it's already happening right now with people that got short-term 1 and 2 year teaser rates, where they said, hey, we're going to just buy this property and we're going to put some paint and we're going to do this and we'll up the properties and we'll up the rents and all this kind of stuff. And we're going to sell it in a year. You just wait. Well, what happened is now that teaser rate at 3% is 9%. The rents didn't go up the way that they wanted. Their property taxes just went up 20% because they overpaid for the building. Now their insurance is going up 15 or 20%, and they have rents rising with expenses increasing. And you're basing that NOI off of a fake cap rate from 2021, 2022. And I'm sorry, but if you put all those factors there together, wait till you have to refi and you see that new appraisal. And I've coined the term 6 months ago, cash in refinancing is the future. Because if you bought a property and you put 20% down, if you change those rents a little bit, you change that exit cap rate, you up those expenses just a little bit, you just went from 20% of equity to having to put money in because you've lost all that equity and then some. And I've seen it happen all over the place. I've seen friends that are already getting capital calls because their syndicators messed up property taxes or messed up insurance, or, they just pulled numbers out of thin air. And these are the people that I'm going to go beat the crap out of the next few years, because it was pure greed and pure just trying to raise rents, not actually providing any value. But the same thing's happening in retail. They built all this retail. They raised all the rents. They didn't think about the fact that the businesses inside of there have to be able to make money. And as nobody's been able to expand and retail transactions were down 70% in Q4 of last year, that's when we started signing more leases, better locations. And because we're using private money, we're doing it debt free. So this next cycle, I can go in, beat the landlords up, get better leases for 15 plus years, be able to pay our investors when nobody else can. And that's why I really think that's my full story that I think is going to play out.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting that, even going in debt free and making this happen. And so, speak to preparing your, say, investors right now for that. So when times are tough in a bit, even now, investors are leery, right? They're feeling the boat shaking a little bit, right? And so some are leery to go put their funds in right now. Well, how are you preparing your investors so when the boat is really rocking, right? They're like, oh yeah, I know I trust Justin. Even in these waves, I want to get in, on these opportunities that he has. How are you doing that?
I think it's a lot of this. I think it's a lot of talking about my thought process behind real estate. And I earned a lot of trust with our investors over the last couple of years by telling them I wasn't going to buy stuff and why. The whole Sloan Capital thing was really created, as bad as it sounds, was created as a way for me to put my dollars to work. Okay. But as I started putting my dollars to work, other people said, hey, can you put some of mine to work? I said, wait a minute, I've already got this system, right? I've got my real estate team. I've got of course, and so that's when I began to syndicate and, buy another strip mall and buy another location, but let a few friends in on it or let a couple other people on it. And then what happened in 2021 was, I'm sitting there with cash ready to go buy real estate. And I looked around and everything was nuts and it was getting more nuts. And so I went to my investors and I said, listen, I'm planning on playing this game for the next 50 years. And there might be a year or two in here where I'm not going to buy stuff. And that's okay, because I don't think, I like to buy off a price per square foot or replacement value or things that we can get some upside, and going and buying things at record high rents and record low cap rates is a disservice to you. And if I want to be doing this in 50 years, I can't, just because there's free money in the world doesn't mean that I had good deals to go put that towards. And I had to look them in the eye, and it sucks, right? Because what do investors want? We want assets under management. We want more buildings. We want all that kind of stuff. But you know what I don't want is bad deals. And I was just okay with taking some off the table and going a different route. And through that, then I showed them what we are doing with the restaurants. And they're like, wait a minute, you don't have to worry about cap rates. You don't have to worry about interest rates. You don't have to worry about all of these other things that people are going to have to worry about the next few years. We can open a restaurant for less than 200 grand debt free. We raise that money, we put it to work, we get the thing. It's just the same as a development deal, right? You find the piece of land, you get the permits, you build it out, you lease it up, and then you get your revenues. The same exact thing we're doing, but we're doing it in 1,000 square foot retail spaces. We find the space, we know the traffic counts, we know the anchors, we know the grocery stores, we build it out, it scales up, we know the time period in which that happens. And as we scale it up, instead of paying our bank notes, we pay our investors. And so we're doing distribution. When I'm hearing of other people right now doing a lot of capital calls and, or halting distributions, we're scaling up our distributions. And if we do that for the next couple of years when everybody else struggles, it will continue to make us look good.
No doubt about it. Your investors are going to be telling their buddies, right? I mean, that's the way it works. That's the way it's worked for us as well.
Absolute best thing that you can do to get more investors is to kill it for your current investors. And I just didn't want to take that risk of, I've got a 10-year reputation with a lot of these people, and going all in because everybody else was going all in didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, you mentioned there's so many things I would love to dive into there, Justin, or talk about. However, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the data, speaks, right? You're a data guy and data tells a story. Just wondering if you could provide any other places or ways that you gather data that you trust, that the listeners and I could look for as well.
Sure. There's a million different sites and a million different, data sources. Essentially, everybody needs to find a few of them that they trust long term and aren't just trying to get the headlines, but are actually trying to show you real data. So however you can get national rent data is very good. Additionally, one thing that I'm looking at a lot right now is new inventory that's in the works, right? So if you're in Nashville or Austin, your rents are starting to come down a little bit, but there's still 8 or 12% more inventory being built right now. That's a data point, right? If I'm in a market and my rents are going down and I know there's more competition coming on the market, that tells me a story, right? And so, which specific, go on Crexy, go on the normal places, find the right people. And honestly, Twitter and Retweet and some of these places have some of the smartest people that are always bouncing back and forth ideas and showing things and saying things. And you need to get involved in conversations with other people that are smarter, and find the data and look at it different ways. I get Zoom groups together all the time and we'll just talk about stuff that we see in different markets. And, that's my job as an investor, is to always get better and to always find those sources and find that information and then use that to make our decisions. And ultimately, my thesis, as I've said, is consumers are hurting. They have more debt than they ever have. They're behind on car payments. Student loan payments are getting ready to restart. There's all these things hurting consumers. So don't tell me you're going to go get record rents. 2 years ago, yes, you can tell me you're going to go get record rents when everyone's flush with money and the government's printing checks to people's mailboxes. But right now is different. And that means our investing thesis needs to be different.
When buying a deal right now, I would just love your take on this, or even, as a passive investor, how do you like to see, let's say it is a deal that works, okay? Given interest rates, those things that we've already discussed, but, what do you like to see from them as far as being prepared for a downturn? If we didn't know there was one coming or didn't feel like either way, how do you, just maybe a couple of things that you could even help the passive investor that's listening right now to know, hey, I need to make sure that, my operator has these things in place?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things, especially in syndication the last few years, has been everybody always talking about how they're going to exit. And so one thing that I like to do, so I am a passive investor into other people's deals. And I think it's important for me not just to be doing my own deals, but also to understand what other people's deals are. And one thing that I think everyone needs to do, a little tip, is as you're getting into investing, save the deck that someone sends you to invest into a deal. Right. And over time, you're going to see a bunch of decks and be able to compare and look at, wait a minute, they told me they were going to raise rents by 30% and exit at this cap rate and all this kind of stuff. And you need to be able to go back and understand whether that person was telling you the truth or not. We just did another fundraising round. And the first thing that I did was I showed the original deck from when we started this thing. And I went line by line over what we thought was right and what's wrong and with inflation and why this and the moves that we've made, and are being very transparent with people about why we're making the moves that we're making. And I think with a lot of new investors, you're kind of assuming the person knows what they're doing. They've done it a lot before. They've got the flashy website and the Instagram, all that kind of stuff that says, yes, let me go invest. But you need to talk to a few other investors. You need to hear what happens and what their plan is if that happens. Because if every deal that you invest into is raising rates and selling at a low cap rate, you're chasing your tail forever. And honestly, buying good deals at fair prices and holding them 5 to 7 years is still a really good business model. And in real estate with the tax benefits and everything like that, we don't need to hit these home runs all the time. Go and find some safe places to put money, not in some top stuff, not in some low, just nice everyday base hits, and go play Moneyball for a couple years. And that's where some real money is made.
All right, Justin, a few final questions with just a few minutes we have left. We'll jump through. But what are some of the most important metrics that you track? It could be personally or professionally, either way.
So, in general, I track everything. I have tracked my net worth for, I think, 14 years on the first of every month. And I actually have notes to myself from 14 years ago. Because I really think it's that important to make sure as you're going through and making mistakes and making hypotheses to speak them out loud and tell yourself and have yourself understand why you're making those decisions. But every business has their own KPIs. In real estate, it could be you're always looking at the rents, or you're always looking at your expense, whatever you're looking at. In my restaurants, our top line growth is very important, and our cost of goods line makes a lot of sense, right? So we have to always monitor the important KPIs for each industry that makes the biggest outcome overall. In general, right, revenue fixes most issues. So the one thing I would say for most people as you're going in is don't underestimate your revenue, because if you don't have revenue, you're going to have a hard time paying all the line items under that revenue.
What are some habits you're disciplined about that have produced the highest return for you?
So just discipline in general is a good thing. Sometimes with our employees, I hear a lot, hey, you're trying to turn us into robots, or you're trying to just make us all do the same thing. But I think about the awesome business that you can create with duplicating the same things and having a team that is all working together. And employees love to work for people that are consistent. They love to work for people that they don't have to think about, do they have to come into work today? Or is that person that I work with going to do the same level of job as I do? And so I think just being consistent and doing the same thing when nobody else does is an amazingly rare trait. And when you can build a team of people that love to be good at systems and good at doing the same thing and doing it really well, it's amazing what you can build, from properties to restaurants to any business, just by doing the same things great every day.
Love that. And how do you like to give back?
Local. Real big for me right now is, I went through a phase where it's, you're sitting at the charity dinners in the tuxedo and you're raising the paddle, and that feels really good for 17 minutes, and then you realize that money went off to who knows wherever, and they took 90% of it for salaries, and they did this and that. And the actual money you wanted to give away, you might have given away 7% of it. And so I've taken a much more diligent approach to paying attention to things that are going on in my community, making sure that kids have their own beds to lay in and that they have food. And I think if all of us pay more attention to local things and making sure that the people in our own communities are taken care of, then a lot of the things in the world would work themselves out, because we wouldn't be pointing fingers all over the place. We could say, we know that our community is taken care of and that we've provided that value back. And if we all scale that kind of mindset, that's where I think some cool things can happen.
Justin, amazing episode. Grateful to have gotten to know you and to hear your story. I know it's so encouraging to many listeners, and they've learned a lot from you today. I mean, being able to step out, even in high school, and making that happen, doing your own business, your own stores, growing, moving into the real estate or capital, restaurants, all these different things that you have become an expert in, and sharing your thoughts, opinions today about the economy and what you expect and how that's affecting the decisions you're making. I think it's very valuable to myself and the listeners. Very grateful for how you've given back to us in that way. Tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you.
Yeah, I actually started the social media thing a couple years ago because, again, as we're opening restaurants and buying buildings and stuff, I think it's fun to tell the story. So Sloan Capital on Instagram, always uploading videos and telling my thoughts on stuff. But then, sloan-capital.com or LinkedIn, Sloan Capital, you can find me about anywhere, and let's connect.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.